Welcome to the Millenniummon deck gameplay guide. So we're gonna have our good friend Dan playing this deck instead today, just because he's been trying it out quite a bit and he's been figuring it out. So we're actually gonna be commentating over him instead. And the first matchup is actually against Magnagar, which is a pretty fun deck, pretty cool matchup. And when it comes to the Millenniummon deck, we're just gonna analyze in terms of how he's playing, and also just trying to see what we can kind of learn from this insight mainly. Keep in mind, guys, like this is kind of like our early stages of playing the deck, so we are learning from it. And what I mostly understand from the Millenniummon deck, it requires a bit of setup. You want to try to go into Chimera or set up a Machinedramon on the board as soon as possible, so you can potentially DNA and go into the Millennium. You need to get into that as soon as possible, because once you get into that, you want to establish your late game combos to go into Moon and Zeed afterwards. And Millenniummon has a lot of control elements to it, as you guys can see, going into the Deltamon here. Deltamon can toss away a card to delete the Boko and control some boards, and potentially even go into a Chimera and then deleting itself and all that, but doesn't make too much sense. So go for the Gazi Search, which makes sense. So then once he goes into one of those Chimeras, which would probably be the BT19 one, the BT19 Chimera could delete the Gazi to delete the Neomon and get rid of it, and basically clearing the board and passing perfectly back to 3, since looks like the opponent wants to establish the Takuya and Koji right there, and they're gonna start at 3 anyways. But looks like that's what I would thought would have done, you know, deleting the Gazi, but looks like Dan deletes himself, which actually makes a lot of sense now, because he has set up the Machinedramon there early, and by deleting the Chimera itself, still gets to delete the Neomon, and then we utilize the Chimera on deletion to delete the Gazi to play out the Machinedramon, so that this essentially brings out the level 6 right away, and he can start trying to find ways to, okay, maybe play the other Chimeramon if he needs to, and try to go for some DNA. He's trying to go for some chip damage here as well. And there's a few routes that I can see him take. He can take it slow, play Giza to draw, but honestly, I think what I learned as well, seeing him play, is that you just want to hard drop the Chimera and have both the BT18 Chimera and the BT18 Machinedra on the board, just to threaten, like, yeah, whenever one of these guys get deleted, you're just going to go ahead and DNA with one and the other to go into Millenniummon. And giving your opponent quite a lot of memory is going to give them a lot of resources, obviously, to play more cards. But it isn't that bad, because if they can't really deal with it immediately, then you have 2 big bodies, and you're always threatening that potential. Once Millennium comes out, you can gain a lot of value off of it, especially when you DNA into. But one thing I'm also going to learn from watching how he plays is that there's other ways. You don't always necessarily need to DNA into Millennia. So it looks like the Magnagar opponent is trying to, you know, control the board back as well. And bouncing effects are pretty strong against this, because it plays around the deletion. So the promo Magnagar there is actually pretty good. Checks into the Wicked God Descends option, which is fantastic setup, because now I can see that all he's missing is a Moon Millenniummon. And if once he can find a way to go into the regular Millenni, the Wicked God Descends are going to continue to give value by being able to play the next level up and so on. So what I meant by earlier, like, okay, here I would be thinking, okay, it's kind of stuck. Do you want to play the Chimera again and then like delete and all that? But you can actually just hard Digivolve into Millenniummon. You don't always need to necessarily go into DNA, because then you can still delete something, and returning stuff to the top of the deck is really just for gaining memory. So at least Dan has established a Machinedramon underneath with some redirects, and Millenniummon is out already, that can actually just start doing some damage and attacking bit by bit. But Magnagar is able to establish quite a lot of tempo, especially having JP plus Takuya. They're going to be able to ramp up quite a lot of sources underneath, and then potentially go for some hybrid combos. Now, it looks like they're just missing a purple source at the moment before they can go for the Dark to Light, Thunder to Gunfire. And it looks like they're going to go for a Beetle play here to potentially Digivolve into something which is going to be the Metal Kabuteri, which de-Digivolves is also really good, that plays around this deck, just because then we're not going to be able to get the on-deletion effects to float things back out. It's also playing around the fact that the Digimon would leave, so we can't use Wicked God, which is a little bit unfortunate. But even though if we're able to use Wicked God, we're still missing the Moon Millennium at this point, and Dan needs to find a way to find it as soon as possible, whether if it's to analog, draw, cycle, and so on. There's not too bad in terms of resources because I think he can always just digivolve into that Millenniummon again. So they look for a chip security, going with the power glue to return the Gazi that they have, and then just digivolve once again. I think, yeah, they're gonna go into this, so then they can just pop away that thing. And it's pretty dangerous here because if the Magna Guard player has the option card, they can easily go into it and they have enough swings. But they also need to play around the Moon Millennium potentially, even though we don't have it in our hand at the moment. You know, they still need to respect it because there's quite a fair chance that they might have it. It's just a rare occasion that he doesn't at this moment. So I think they're trying to think of it carefully. They're ramping a bunch of sources underneath Koji and Takuya. They could potentially go for 4 different hits. If they have a Loey and a Beetle and one more extra hybrid, they can potentially make 4 hits to play around the redirection ones as well, as long as they're not removing the Millenniummon. They could de-digivolve once again if they want to, if they want to go for that, and that would actually play around the redirection as the main source of defense. So things are looking kind of tough here, and it looks like he allows the checks to go through, the first one at least. And it's really just more about like whether if they have 2 more hybrids to make a swing and then take down all the security, and then they can utilize the Takuya and Koji end of turn to go into another hybrid, which sometimes might be rare, but it does happen because it is a hybrid deck after all if they're able to have that amount of memory. So it looks like they actually don't have it, so they're gonna go into Magna Guard. And with Magna Guard, it's actually not able to delete Millenniummon either, just because there's no level 7s in the source to go for that kind of play. So they're just going to tuck away whatever they have. I believe it was a Lobo, and they're just going to go for a swing. And they do DP reduce, because it looks like they have a Rhino Kabuteru or a Rihi. And then so that they would redirect, and because it will be deleted, Dan can easily just cycle back the Chimera and the machine from the trash, and then play out the Millennium again, and that just straight up deletes the Magna Guard stack. So this is a pretty good position to go for a comeback play, and it's really cool. Just the fact that the Millenniummon can always cycle itself back as long as there's Chimera and machine in the trash to continue to bomb deck. It's just really unfortunate that there's no Moon Millenniummon, because if he's able to go into Moon Millenniummon, then this would be a fantastic spot to be in. So then you can take away cards from the opponent's hand and also like delete the Tamers, which would be absolutely perfect in this matchup. And that's one of like the major win conditions to counter against this matchup, by deleting Tamers. And chances are they could have a lot of cards in their hand, and for every 2, that's Tamer's gonna be 1 Tamer gone. And that's how Dan can sort of like survive and stay in the game. But that's really, really tricky again, just not seeing that Moon Millennium. So of course, just gonna try to chip away damage as much as he can and attack. And here at this moment, then it's again about that question, whether they have those hybrids. Because now Dan no longer has any redirects because he lost the Machinedramon. And there's nothing that's really like that can like blast Ace to sort of like protect him and keep him in the game, which Chimeramon doesn't really run in the deck either. So it looks like they're gonna go ramp up a lot of sources underneath Takuya and Koji, and they could easily go into another Magna Guard and use some end of turn effects and try to attack and suspend. And again, depending on what sort of hybrids they have in their hand, they can possibly try to finish the game. So here comes down the Dark to Light, Thunder to Gunfire, which then tells me here at this point it's pretty tricky now, because that means they can go into Magna Guard and keep turn, and they still have a second Takuya and Koji to work with. And the Magna Guard can actually potentially make 2 hits, but it looks like they go into the promo Magna Guard, meaning that they probably don't have the other regular Magna Guard. Checks into another Wicked God, which honestly, this has been so good as a setup, and just again, unfortunately, Loey for game there. Okay, in this second game, facing off against Lucamon X. Now, looking at the opening hand, I don't think Dan wants to keep this either, just because there's no starting cards to work with. You know, I think the ideal cards you want to see is a Rookie, Analog Youth, those kind of setup pieces to help establishing your trash, which this one looks a little bit better because there's Analog Youth and Wisdom Training to use. And with going first, Analog Youth is always nice because you can grab a piece, trash the stuff you need, and now finding a Gazi, you know, having a Chimera set up in trash, having a Moon this time, which he can finally probably get into if he's able to achieve into that late game stage. The nice thing when it comes to going against the Lusamon deck is that it has a lot of deletion effects, and Millenniummon can really utilize off of that there. And with that, it can give it a lot of advantages because then potentially you can float stuff back, or you can use the Wicked God Descends, delay to go into your next level and the next stages. Here, I kind of find it interesting how he decided to go for the Gazi. I believe he wanted to go for the search and give as little memory as possible, and checks into the Wicked God Descends, which is really nice here. That means it's great setup. I can see that he has another one to work with in the hand, but I felt like, okay, maybe he might want to play the Nene in the prior turn just because then he can establish like a memory setter. But again, with Lusamon, they give a lot of memory back mostly, so memory would not be too much of an issue in this particular matchup. He goes into Delta, and I can see he probably wants to pitch and sort of cycle stuff here. Now, the only downside is if there was one extra memory to work with in this turn, that would have been pretty good. I feel like he could have did the same combo from the previous game where it Digivolve into Chimera, delete itself to delete either like a Lusamon or the Uko on the board, and then bring out like a Machinedramon. And then that would have popped both bodies, and he would have set up the Machinedramon on the board there. So the only, like I said, the only downside is like there's no extra body to work with, so that combo is actually not achievable. So I think I see he just goes down for the Nene here so that he can utilize Digicross requirements from the trash, which would be nice because then that would give better extra inheritables to work with, even though like the memory may not matter because starting at 3 is nice, but since again Lusamon tends to pass quite a lot, that's quite a decent amount of work with. So I think here Dan is certainly contemplating to going into the BT19 Chimera. I can see he has both to work with. But he's only just missing a rookie, because if he can establish a rookie just to hard play for 3 memory, then he has an extra body to delete and he can synergize those combos there. There's several lines I can see that he can also try to attempt here now since he drew into the Machinedramon. I think he's contemplating of Digivolving straight into the Machinedramon, and then that could pop a body. But also I think he's looking like he wants to just go ahead and Digicross and set up a Wicked God Descends, which can favor him very nicely in the later stages because he has Moon, he has Zeed to work with. The hand is pretty heavy at this moment, and there's no rookies. And even though with Millenniummon, what I learned is that it doesn't necessarily always need to have rookies in the mid stages of the game at least, because you can give a lot of memory to the opponent, but you can just get rid of stuff, and if they're not able to answer the Millenniummon quick enough and get rid of it, you just easily go into your top end 7s. No problem, and they're not going to be able to do anything about it. And once you have those level 7s out on the board, you just start beating them down again and again and again. It's just incredibly difficult. Dan is taking quite a lot of damage at this moment because of like the Lusamon starter mains and forcing like for decisions. But this is what I'm trying to say. Like when they go into a chaos mode, of course he's gonna delete his own Millenniummon, and then now he deletes the only Millenniummon, he can float it back out, try to attempt to delete the chaos mode. Well, of course, the chaos mode is going to protect itself by trashing the security. So I think here is like a bit of a different sequencing of effects. I believe the Moon Millenniummon should have came out first with the Wicked God Descends. That looks like the opponent only has no more than 5 cards in their hand, which is pretty good because that means Moon Millenniummon is not going to be able to utilize this effect to trash cards from the hand and delete a Tamer potentially, which, I mean, that's okay because once Moon Millenniummon is out, he can have another way to access into Zeed Millenniummon just by Digivolving straight into it. Goes out into a Lusamon X there. Lusamon X is going to force decisions to whether trash, security, and delete. He is taking quite a lot of damage, and the Lusamon is going to be able to get quite a lot of recovery off of it. So yeah, like I said, it looks like he wants to go into Zeed to Digivolve in there. But with Zeed, it is pretty decent because being able to return something back to the top of the deck of the opponent's trash, he can bottom deck the Lusamon X. Lusamon X does have that 1-turn protection, which forces both players to trash the security. And there's the 7th Divine Cruise trashed away, which is nice. So the other thing with Zeed Millenniummon though is that its effect is not even once per turn, and you can utilize it when digivolving and when attacking as well. So he's gonna go for chip damage, hitting into the Lusamon X, but there's no Machine Dramon to work with to float the Millenniummon back out. The Zeed can actually still attack. So when the Zeed attacks, it can use that same effect all over again, which I believe he actually completely forgot to do it here, but that's okay, because he intends to actually go ahead and use the Wicked God Descends to play out the Millenni, and then use Digicross to put some sources underneath and delete it the second time anyways. But then I feel like he could have cleared the entire board, because if he did clear the entire board, then the Uko wouldn't be there either. But I think in the position he's still sitting pretty good, because getting rid of that Lusamon X means the opponent can't really finish the game off. And then by having the Millenniummon that at least has a redirect attack, that stops the Uko from swinging for game, and the deck doesn't really have trash either. And then he goes for a end of turn overclock to go for another hit by deleting his own Millenniummon. His Millenniummon gets to come back out by bottom decking the Machine Dramon and the Chimeramon, which ends up deleting Uko there anyways. But that wasn't quite necessary, because I think he forgot about how Zeed Millenniummon is not once per turn. It happens when digivolving and when attacking, just to remind you guys. And the fact that if you overclock and attack once more, you're attacking again, so you can use it again. And that's how strong Zeed Millenniummon really is. And he's still sitting in a really good position, despite giving the opponent quite a lot of memory to work with, just because Lusamon doesn't really have a rush to deal with the game and just to like finish it off either. They're gonna go for a Dead or Alive play, which honestly is gonna be more in favor for Millenniummon. But with that little amount of cards they have in hand, it probably means they have very limited resources in making their plays. So Dan can make a choice. He can try to attempt to delete his own Millenniummon, use Wicked God, bring out Moon. Although Moon's not gonna do too much, just because again the opponent doesn't have that many cards in their hand. So you're not going to be deleting Tamers, you're not going to be able to like utilize the full effect of Moon to trash his security either, so he ends up just taking out his Nene instead. And he feels confident just because he knows that he can have a lot of memory, just because they're going to hard play that older Lusamon just to recover. And here there's more than enough swings, and he's just going to go ahead and check. And again, he kind of forgot to utilize it when attacking, but I think we kind of figured out later on. Here comes the Blast Digivolve. But yeah, Zeed Millennium's supposed to utilize it when attacking effect, because he is the turn player after all. So he's actually able to bottom deck the Chaos mode first, and then the opponent can then go into their ace. So by threatening and trying to bottom deck the Lusamon Chaos mode, it only makes sense that the opponent wants to like trash the security to keep it on the board, and then because so they can Blast Digivolve here, block an attack, DP reduce, and get rid of that Gazi so that it can't make another swing. Even though they're gonna have to take an Ace Overflow. He does forget to grab the Gazi off the Pagumon on deletion, but I think he has it here. He has a combo where he can just finish the game off, and it looks like he wants to go for a fancy one too, because all he has to do is Digivolve to Zeed Millenniummon anyways. And then this is where, yeah, he's reading Moon Millenniummon, so he's gonna hard drop that Moon Millenniummon for the full cost. He forgets to use the Zeed Millennium Digivolving again, but it doesn't matter, because at the end of the turn, he's going to overclock, pop his own Millenni, and because of Moon Millenni sees the Millenni being deleted, trashes the security, and finishes off. Which actually is huge, because there's a Satan mode in that security. This game, he's playing up against Nature Spirits, and this is his first time facing against it, so he doesn't really have too much of an idea on how to go against it, because Nature Spirits can actually ramp up and go super wide and make a ton of attacks, and if they snowball that hard, they can just basically keep chipping Millennium down and kind of outpace it as a matter of fact. But looks like Dan wants to keep his hand. It's pretty good starting. There's a fair amount of rookies to work with, so his mind as well, and there's definitely opportunities and ins and out, because if Dan can find to get into the Millenniummon as soon as possible, which is definitely going to be his priority at this moment, then he can start establishing and controlling the board. Most of the removal from Nature Spirits are either a little bit of de-digivolving, which plays around it, but a lot of it really actually is DP reduction. And if they're able to DP reduce, that means Dan's going to end up getting deleted And when his stuff gets deleted, he can always easily float it back out, which is not bad at all. So they go straight into ALittleSpoon very early here, and ooh, looks like if they find the Millenniummon, they could easily go for the DNA play, but looks like they don't have it, so they're gonna end up playing the Gecko and the Otama, which is fine because Otama does counter Millenniummon a little bit, especially when it comes to the Wicked God Descends. It can't reduce cost to play out the Millenniummons. You can't really digicross and go for those combos either. So all Dan can really do at this moment is to attempt to search as quickly as possible. Goes into the Delta so that he can pitch away a card and probably grabbing the Millennium back to hand, which is really nice because the Delta being able to recur resources from trash is super helpful. And then going into Chimera here, probably deleting the Gazi to get rid of both the Gecko and the Otama, which is pretty decent value there. Unfortunately, there's no Millenniummon to work with just yet, because then that'll be pretty good. So then he'll be able to de-digivolve the Eldorado as well. So I think the opponent noticed this and decided to go ahead and sort of trade even with retaliation, even though he has blocker plus retaliation, just so that like getting rid of that Chimeramon so he can potentially can't get out the Millenniummon again. So it's okay for Dan. He still has a lot of searching potential and can finding pieces. Establishing multiple analog use is also really good because then he's going to be able to gain a ton of memory when he goes through those on deletion combos later on. And establishing the Nene here so that he'll no longer get choked with 1 memory. So he can start with working with 3 and he can easily then climb up to his next levels. They're going to go into a Showing Gecko. And it's going to stun down the Nene, so not going to be able to use the Digicross the next turn, and goes for chip damage. And this is very valuable with the analog. And now he's able to like search and find pieces, and he can finally toss away the Millenniummon and have access to that, meaning he can start utilizing as a resource of some sort when he comes to going for the combos. So it looks like he's going to push out the Gazi, and there's either Deltamon that you can get into, but there's no point digivolving into the black one because the Tortomon can't be deleted. So he can probably try to find a way to potentially clear the both bodies on the board. That would be really, really good. And he's trying to find out what piece to grab back from the trash as well. And of course, he just goes for the Millenniummon. He's going to swing with the Deltamon. And I don't think he actually knows this, but again, this is his first time playing against this deck, so he actually had no idea that the Saber Leo Ace was going to be coming down potentially, and chances are they usually have it because they play a lot, and with that thick of a hand, chances are, yeah, they got it. But here he can gain a bit of memory back, and I have Gazi. Now I can see he's considering playing the Wicked God Descend option card this moment, but he can't because he lost his purple source. So the really ideal thing he can do is just set up Nene, wait for the next turn, and then play it. And he can take his time. Yes, this Nature Spirits deck is going to chip down at his security quite quickly, but it doesn't look like they're finding a rookie at the back either. And it seems like they're kind of bricked on the rookie a little bit. And they're not able to go into their level 5 either. And they can't climb up to their 6, so they won't be able to DNA into a Talakmon. If they're able to pull that off, then that would be pretty tricky, because then they can then go super wide board and make multiple attacks the following turn and just, yeah. But here he's good because now he can actually use the Wicked God Descent option. I wonder why he didn't choose to use it in the end there, because I feel like you could still establish it, because then that can give him access to Moon and that could be pressuring with his delay. But he just decided to go for a hard cross using the Nenes and tucking the Chimera machines from the trash under, and then just giving deleting the Saber Leo Ace, getting Ace Overflow, and passing only 3 memory to the opponent is still pretty nice, because then you're you know, giving them as little to work with as possible. It looks like the opponent is having a little bit of trouble climbing back up. I think probably trying to find out level 6, but it looks like they don't have. They could spend the Saber Leo Ace now, but now Dan knows that what Saber Leo Ace does. He can easily play around it, which wouldn't be too much of a problem. So he's gonna go ahead and swing with it anyways, knowing that. And there's another Saber Leo Ace, there's a Vike Ace. Yeah, Nature Spirits can play a fair amount of aces in their deck, and the 2 checks, that's pretty heavy value. So he's starting to make a comeback and clap back with it as well. So that could tell him 2 things. Maybe the opponent doesn't want to go an ace just yet, or maybe there's no point, or they just simply don't have it. And guess doesn't really matter here at this point, because with Millenniummon and Chimera here on the board, he's gaining so much advantage and value, because with so many analog use as well, he's going to use the Chimera to delete his own Millenniummon, to delete one of his opponent's Digimon with the lowest level. Yeah, lowest level or lowest DP. I can't remember which one it was. It's lowest of something. And then he can float back the Millennium to pop the other one anyways. And then he can still keep turn thanks to Analog Youth, because something was deleted that's level 5 or higher in sources. And it looks like he wants to end it with a Wicked God Descends, but I felt like he could have just also Digivolved in a Rook in the back, just for the extra swing the next turn, right? So then that's like basically 4 potential hits depending on what the opponent has. Looks like they are pretty bricked up, and all they really have is a Toromon to hard drop to really defend themselves. And it's going to be difficult because, yeah, they're not going to be able to Digivolve into 5, into 6, and, you know, sometimes the Nature Spirits deck is kind of high roll. If they see it in the early stages with a Audi Rod review, then that's great. So he decides to go to the Moon Millennium just by Digivolving it for 2. No, not always needing to use Wicked God Descends to get into it, because by Digivolving, you still get the trash cards off the opponent's hand. It looks like they actually are just flooded with level 4s in there, and probably not even finding their Tallock. And at this point, Dan can just go ahead and start chipping away the security, attack bit by bit, and try to establish lethal. And because the Gazi was deleted as well, gets to trash, and he can finish it off with Zeed, even with Overclock, deleting his own stack, suspend the analogs to keep turn, and that basically swings for game. Don't forget to grab the Spirit Transcendence collection on the AVAULT store right now, as we have limited quantities. As always, thank you so much for watching. You guys have a great day, great night, wherever you are. See you next video, and this is AVAULT signing